Ah, the circle of fifths. Another one of those music theory terms that guitarists like myself have shied away from for years. And for good reason too, because it's been one of those things that is just really hard to explain in layman's terms. I have asked academics in music to explain it to me, and it just goes right over my head. So I've decided to take on the challenge of understanding the circle of fifths and how it can be dumbed down to its most basic parts, and most importantly, how it can be used as a tool for making music. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be explaining the circle of fifths to you in a manner that I wish someone told me when I was first trying to figure it out. So first of all, what is the circle of fifths? Think of it as a tool that lays out the 12 notes in music in a specific order, the order of fifths, which we'll get into in a second, but it lays them out in a way that gives you a very, very effective visual aid for creating chord progressions and knowing how to play chords within any key. And if you happen to have heard the term Nashville number system before, which happens to be another very effective tool in not only creating music, but also learning and deconstructing music, the circle of fifths is a much more in-depth look at basically what the Nashville number system can also teach you. So you can consider both concepts very useful, and if you know them both, then you're just twice as well equipped. And if you don't already know or use the Nashville number system, by understanding the circle of fifths in a way that I'm about to show you, it's actually going to, by association, teach you how to use the Nashville number system. All right, now what do you say we kill these two birds with one stone and get started? So like I just said, think of the circle of fifths as a visual tool that lays out the 12 notes in music. And what really, really holds this all together is the major scale. I want you from now on to look at the major scale as the most important scale in music, which it literally is. Major doesn't just mean like the quality of the sound or like the fact that it sounds happy. Major literally means it is the major scale. It is the most important scale in music, and all of music is derived from it. So even if playing a major scale is not really your thing, and let's say the style of music you like to do or that you want to do, it's a very important benchmark to just understanding kind of where all music comes from. Okay, so if we were to look at the C major scale, right? The 7 notes in the C major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and number them accordingly, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, assigning each of those notes their respective numbers. This is how we can understand, first of all, why it's called circle of fifths. Because if you look at a circle of fifths layout, right, the notes, if you look at them going clockwise, like for example, the top note being C, you see the one right after that, it's G. G happens to be a fifth from C. Now let me explain how you figure that out. Take a look at this, okay? I'm just gonna tell you right now what the notes of the C major scale are. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. That's it. Real simple, no sharps or flats or anything like that, real simple. So it's just like the order of the alphabet, starting from C, ending at B. C, D, E, F, G, right? Musical alphabet ends at G, and then starts over A, B, right? And then of course, C is our octave. So remember, those notes are numbered. So if we count them, starting from 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? This is the 5th note. And guess what? It happens to be G. So the distance from C to G is a matter of a fifth. So that's literally what that means. When you hear numbers used in music, it's talking about the assigned number as it appears in the scale. So let's say, just to reiterate, if we were to talk about the 5th of G, okay? So if you see on the circle of fifths layout, you have next to C, right, going clockwise, is G, and then next to G going clockwise is D. That would mean that D is a 5th distance from G. So how do we figure that out? Let's play the G major scale, right? We adjust the key to G, and we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7 notes, right? Taking the same scale pattern, right? The major scale, and just adapting it to the key of G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th note happens to be, you guessed it, D, right? So that's just to validate, right, that every note that you see going clockwise on that outer rim, right, of the circle of fifths, those are all a 5th distance from each other. And you'll notice there is an inner circle, which we'll get to in a second, that has the minor chords or keys or whatever, and those are also in a distance of fifths of each other. So that's pretty much why the whole thing means circle of fifths. Now going back to the key of C, if we were to figure out all the notes that go in the C major scale using the circle of fifths, this is all you have to do. Don't worry so much about the why, worry more about the how, okay? If you were to look at C, which is the tonic, right, or the note reflecting of the key, right? If we're in the key of C, therefore the 1 is going to be C. So if we were looking at C on the circle of fifths layout, all right, and we went 1 space counterclockwise, that note would be F. Okay, so what you want to do is go one space counterclockwise and then count the 7 subsequent notes starting from F on the diagram, right? And that's how you get all the notes in the C major scale. Now, they're not going to be in order, but they are going to be all the notes. They will all be there. So remember how I said the notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, B? Now, if we look at it, right, we have F, right, which as we've covered, that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th note. Then we have C, of course, our 1. Then after that, we have G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's our 5th note, right? And then after that is D, 1, 2. That happens to be the 2nd note, right? Then after D, and again, this is on the diagram, is A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A happens to be the 6th note, right, in the C major scale. And then, of course, we have, after that, we have E, 1, 2, 3. That's the 3rd note, right? Again, don't worry so much about the Y. I'm just showing you exactly, everything I'm showing you, just take it as gospel. These are the notes in the scale, and that's how they're numbered, right? And then after E, we have B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. B happens to be the 7th note, right? So it's in a weird order. In fact, it's ordered out in fifths, right? So if we were to take, starting from F, then C, and then G, and then D, it's kind of moving in fifths, right? And then we have A, then E, and then we have B, right? So it's all the notes in the scale, just in that interesting order. Which is kind of a cool way to play a major scale, right? That's kind of a cool, almost jazz fusion-y kind of lick. That's pretty cool, I like that. But that aside, okay, how does that help us with creating music? So knowing all the notes, right, in let's say the C major scale, we're just gonna be focusing on this one key primarily, okay? Understanding all the notes in the C major scale is a layout of all the chords that you can use in the key of C. And we're gonna talk about how we can use the circle of fifths diagram, right, to actually pretty much spell that out for us. So if let's say you're in the key of C, the circle of fifths can tell you exactly what chords you can use in that key that are going to sound good and musically correct no matter how you spin it. So in taking that a step further, we're gonna figure out how we can incorporate these single notes into chords and create chord progressions. So if we're in the key of C, right? Remember how I said if we're trying to find all the notes in the C major scale, right, which are pretty much our benchmark for the chords that we can use, we have to first go one space counterclockwise, right? And then we have to fill in those 7 notes. So that counterclockwise at one space, that's gonna be reflected of our 4 chord. So, right, the 4th note in the scale, right, which in the key of C, 1, 2, 3, 4 is F, meaning that the F chord is the 4 chord in the key of C. Now, if you're familiar with chord progressions like 1, 4, 5, for example, which is one of the most common chord progressions in Western music, you know, right? How the circle of fifths can help you find that is, if you look at the diagram, you have the C, right? And then one space counterclockwise, F is your 4 chord. And then one space clockwise from C is G, which is your 5 chord. So anywhere you are on that outer rim, right, of the circle of fifths, you can pick any key you want. The one space to counterclockwise is your 4 chord, one space clockwise is your 5 chord, automatically every single time. So this is just laid out, you know, when we look at the key of C. We have C being our 1 chord, F being our 4 chord, and G being our 5 chord. So how familiar does that chord progression sound? Right, and that can be done in so many different ways, right? Of course, that's like what order you put them in is up to you and what appeals to you the most creatively, right? But as far as its basic fundamentals, that right there is how you find the most common chord progression ever used in Western music using the circle of fifths. So going a little bit further, right, now that we have our 1 chord and our 4 chord and our 5 chord, there are still these other numbers we haven't covered, right? Also, I wanted to mention that our 4 and the 5 in a major key, the 4 and the 5 are almost always going to be major. That's just naturally what tends to happen the most, right? So in the key of C, our 4 chord is F major, right? 5 chord is G major. But what about minor chords? Well, in order to incorporate minor chords, we have to understand something called relative minor. And all you need to know about what relative minor means is in a major key, there is a minor chord in that key that relates to that major chord, that key chord, right? And it relates in a way that you can play the same scale and it still works. So check this out. If I were to just play a C chord and then play the C major scale, works, right? Makes sense. Now, the relative minor of C happens to be A minor, right? Which if you're looking at the circle of fifths, if you're looking at the diagram, you'll see that in that inner circle, right, that inner rim, there's an A minor directly underneath C, which happens to be the relative minor. So all those major chords that you're seeing on the outer rim, beneath them, each one is the relative minor of those same chords. So you have A minor there, right? Now, if I played an A minor and then with that fresh in your ears, I played the C major scale, it would sound like this. Then if I reverted back to major, right? So you can see how playing that same scale and just kind of going about it that same way worked beneath, underneath both of those chords. Hence the term relative minor to major. So where does the relative minor fall numerically, right? So that would be, if A minor is the relative minor of C, we got to find an A note in the C major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It happens to be right here, second fret of the D string. That's an A note, and we made that minor in the form of an A minor chord. So that would be our 6 minor. 6 minor chords are also very frequently used in Western music alongside the 4 and the 5 chords. So if we were to do something like that, for example, was a 1, 6 minor, 4, 5, or 1, 6, 4, 5. Usually when the 6 is mentioned, it's implied that it's minor because it's most commonly used that way, right? But just to really, really differentiate and just to be specific, you tend to say 6 minor, so you imply, yes, it's the 6th chord in the major scale, but I'm playing a minor chord. But we still have a few more chords to cover. So looking at that inner rim in the circle of fifths, right? Right where you see A minor, the relative minor to C major, right? You'll see 2 chords on either side of it, right? One on the counterclockwise side, one on the clockwise side, and those chords are D minor and E minor respectively. Those chords happen to be the 2 minor and the 3 minor in the key of C. How do I know that it's the 2 minor and the 3 minor? Check this out. So D minor, right, implies that D is the root note. So let's find D in the C major scale, okay? Starting from C. Oh, we found it already. It's the 2nd note, right? C, D, right? It's just also the second, the subsequent letter in the alphabet, right? C, D, that's 2, number 2, 1, 2. And we play it in minor, right? Or if you do open D minor. So it's 2 minor, right? And then 3, E, what comes after D in the musical alphabet, if we're not counting sharps and flats? E, right? So if we were to take that E and make it a minor chord, we'd have E minor, which is our 3 minor chord. So already we found 6 chords that we can use in the key of C that, like I said, will be musically correct no matter what order you put them in. Check this out. Let's start with C, and then let's play, say, the 3 minor, E minor. Ooh, that sounds nice. Then let's say I want to play the 6 minor, A minor. I like that. Okay, and then maybe the 4 chord. And then let's say the 5 chord. All of that works. Now if I were to put a little musical spin on it and make it sound like it's on purpose, it sounds something like this. Let's say a basic chord progression like. So right there, that was completely off the cuff, just using the fact that now, I've let the circle of fifths basically reveal to me the 6 chords that I can use in a given key, in the key of C, to make a viable chord progression just like that. But now you may be thinking, okay, we've got 6 chords, but I thought there were 7 chords, right, in the key that we just went over. So what's that 7th chord? Good question. The 7th chord, which in this case would be B in the key of C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that note being B. The 7th note, right, is typically played in a diminished, right? And a diminished chord is something, used very commonly in jazz. It's very much a jazz kind of sensibility, and it's very useful. It's a very good, kind of bridge chord, but it's very uncommonly used in your average day-to-day Western music chord progressions. basically the B diminished leads up into the C. So if I were to play it, it's just kind of like it's a point of tension that wants to resolve to the 1. So that's one way that you can use it if you so choose, right? So the B is not major or minor, it's played in a diminished, and that goes for in any key. The 7th chord, that you find using the major scale is going to be played as a diminished. So okay, we've covered this in the key of C, but why don't we move it to a different key just so we can really put this practice to good use, right? So we've talked about what the circle of fifths actually is, what it tells you, how you can use it to find the notes in the major scale, and how you can use the major scale and the numbers of each note in the scale to determine the chords that you play in any given key to make a proper chord progression, aka creating music. So if we were to shift the key, let's shift it over to G. That's a very common key. So let's take a look at G and how we'd use the circle of fifths to tell us all the chords we can play in G. Well, for starters, we can take that chunk, right, that we saw in the key of C, how we had like C, we had the 4 and the 5 on either side, we had the relative minor, and then we had the 2 and the 3 on either side, right? The 6 very common, very useful chords that we can use in a progression, and we just literally shifted that or highlighted it down to the key of G. It would look like this, right? We have the key of G, and then we're going to look on the counterclockwise side, which the note would be C, that's the 4 chord. And then on the clockwise side of G, we have D, which is the 5 chord. And then if we look at the inner rim, right beneath G, we have the relative minor, which is E minor. And then if we look to the counterclockwise of E minor, we'll have A minor, which is the 2 minor. And then if we look clockwise from the relative minor, 6 minor, aka E minor, right, you would have B minor, which is the 3 minor in the key of G. I'm throwing all these terms at you because these are all synonymous. You'll hear them being used to describe the same thing. So it's just something that I really want to just drive home so that you're not thrown off if you hear someone describing the same thing just using different terminology, right? So just like that, it's told us, the 6 most common chords we can use in that progression. If we wanted to go, if we wanted to figure out the 7th or diminished chord, right? All we'd have to do at this point is, remember what I said, we start from the root note, right? If we're doing G, we go 1 over counterclockwise, which is the 4 chord, and then we count 7 clockwise. That's all the notes. So F sharp would be the 7 chord. So you'd play an F sharp diminished if you wanted to throw that in there. But check it out. We have the 1 chord, G. Okay. And then if we were to just go in order, right, from 1 to 6, right, in this case, we got the 1 chord, we got our 2 chord, 2 minor, A minor, right? Our 3 chord, which is 3 minor, B minor, right? Then our 4 chord, which is C, our 5 chord, which is D, then our 6 minor, which is E minor. So that's just in order. If you listen to them in order, it works, right? But of course, they don't have to be in order. You can make whatever order you want, right, to actually make something creative, but and also experiment. You could try stuff out. Like, okay, let's say I want to start on the 2 minor instead of starting on the 1 chord, just for funsies, right? So we're in the key of G. If I want to start on the 2 minor, that would be A minor, right? And let's say I wanted to do something like, this is kind of a jazz thing, right? Let's do like a 2 and a 5. So 2 minor chord, 5 chord, then the 1. Kind of has a little bit of a jazzy sound. So if we do the 2 minor, which is A minor, the 5 chord, which is D, and then the 1 chord, it sounds pretty. So if I did something like this, like, and then from there, I kind of hear the 6 minor coming along, right? So using the circle of fifths, you can harness the creative process, right? Like, again, right there, just completely off the cuff, just experimenting, just going with kind of what feels good, right? And of course, that's something that you'll develop over time as you get comfortable with navigating these chords, but you can focus, especially with like a key like C or G, for the most part, you're gonna be using open chords, cowboy chords, right? Stuff that you probably already know and you've played a million times over. So you can actually now harness what you know use the circle of fifths as a tool to allow more creative expression, because now you don't have to guess what chords can you use when you're playing in any given key. But what if you didn't want to stop there? What if you wanted to start using what are called borrowed chords, right? Which are essentially chords that aren't necessarily in key or part of the scale. They're kind of like altered notes, but they can still work, because here's the thing, guys, about music theory. Music theory is an incredible tool, right? Just like what we're talking about today, about this being a tool, something useful for you to use, right? Music theory is a great tool, and it's a great set of rules to give you the fundamentals, right, of understanding the basic mechanics of how music works. But rule breaking, right, is what makes for good music. You got to learn the rules before you break them, right? So doing something like borrowed chords, including that, in a chord progression, is a way of sort of breaking and bending the rules. But if they sound good, then guess what? It is good. So if you wanted to know what borrowed chords you can get by using the circle of fifths as your visual aid, let's say with the key of G again, right? What you're going to have to do is using something called parallel minor. So not relative minor. What parallel minor is you're taking the key, which in this case is G major, and making it minor. That's it. So instead of G major, we're switching to G minor. But what we're doing is on the circle of fifths, we're finding G minor, right, within that inner rim, and then we're going to find the surrounding 6 chords. So we have G minor, right? So if you're looking at the circle of fifths diagram, right, we're looking at one space, to the counterclockwise and one space clockwise. So we have C minor and D minor in that respect. And then above G minor, we have B flat, and then counterclockwise of that, we have E flat, and then clockwise of B flat, we have F. So we have an additional 6 chords that we can borrow that actually kind of work. So check this out. Let's start with F, for example. So if we're playing in the key of G, and then we throw in an F chord, that's what's called a flat 7, right? It's known as an altered chord. It's a chord that's not really in key, but somehow really works. And if you think about most music, especially rock music and a lot of country music, they do this chord progression, which is known as 1 flat 7 4, in which case you'd be playing the 1, which is G, flat 7, which is F, and then 4, which is C. Listen to that. Super familiar, right? All right, that works, right? Even though we've kind of broken the rules a little bit, or bent the rules, however you want to see it, we've created something that sounds not only musically correct, but very familiar too. So let's look at the rest of these borrowed chords, right? So of course, with parallel minor, right, if we're switching from G to G minor, we're essentially making that 1 minor, right? But if we were to look at the other ones, right, so we have F, which we've already talked about, the flat 7. Let's look at B flat, right? So B flat, like if you were to imagine an open A chord, and then bring that shape up a fret, that's B flat right there. B flat happens to be a flat 3 to G. And 1 flat 3 4 is another very common progression, especially in rock music. Check this out. All right, so what I did there, which was very familiar sounding, right, was 1 flat 3 4. So that was another borrowed chord. And it's also, like I said, very familiar, harkens to music you've heard before. And therefore, it's the type of rule breaking that still sounds good, right? This is the point I'm trying to make. All right, and going forward, we have E flat, which if we were to play it, kind of more closer to the nut, it looks something like this. It's like if you were to take a D chord and then just bring it up 1 fret, the whole shape, and just play the bottom 3 strings. That's one way you can do it. So how would that relate in the key of G? So if we were to think of, you want to try not to play that open D chord. Here's actually a way you can do it. That's a pretty cool sound. That almost sounds like a chord progression, something I'd hear on Star Trek or something like that. Yeah, it sounds very spacefaring, So what I'm doing here is I'm actually trying to find comfortable ways to play E flat. So here's a way to play E flat right here with starting on the 6th fret of the A string. Another A-shaped chord, right, if you don't already know. Or of course you can do the, kind of making a D chord, right, or if you were to just use just this shape with just the bottom 3 strings. However you do it, then you can really hear how it sounds in relation to the one chord. This is all just to demonstrate, right? Pretty cool. So there's another borrowed chord that works. So if we were to look at another one, we have C minor can actually work as a 4 minor because we have the 4 chord, which is C, and then we can make it minor and then make that relate back to G. So this is another thing that's going to sound familiar. Check this out. If I were to play, let's say, a chord progression like this. Also very familiar sounding, right? So that was just 1, 4, 4 minor, 1, right? Now let's take a look at 5 minor, which is D minor. Now the 5 minor is especially cool. It has a very, I don't know, to me it just sounds like something you hear when you're listening to a good story. So if I were to play a D minor next to a G, it would sound something like this. I kind of want to hear a 4 coming next. Yeah, so like 1, 5 minor, 4, 1 sounds pretty cool. Or if we did 4 minor too. Right, so I'm just having fun here, you know, but this is all really just off the cuff stuff I'm coming up with to demonstrate to you literally how this tool can be useful when you're creating music. And this is something that can be a great starting point for you. And then of course you can like make edits later on, like, okay, maybe I didn't like that chord, or maybe this chord works better than that one. But it's gonna put you on the path to harnessing the creative process. You can literally create endless amounts of chord progressions and song ideas by using the circle of fifths. So now you have an understanding of why the circle of fifths is not something to run away from. It's actually an extremely powerful tool that can not only help you understand music and the building blocks of it, but how to create music yourself. In fact, I challenge you to take what you've learned today and apply it. So create your own chord progression using the circle of fifths, and to keep it simple, just start in the key of C. And while we're on the topic of powerful tools that'll help you with your guitar playing, there's one more thing I want to give you before I go. And I happen to have it right here. It's a system that I've developed called the fretboard conveyor belt. What this is going to do is show you how to create awesome guitar solos using a very simple method that literally moves patterns across the fretboard and allows you to explore all the space that the fretboard can offer in very easy ways and how to apply it in any musical key. So be sure to click here to claim your free copy or check the link in the description box. And with that said, I want to thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. I'm Eddie with Guitar Mastery Method, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.